Some years after I dropped out of my physics degree, I derived an equation. Not in a lab, not in a classroom, not surrounded by professors. And when I realized what I had just derived, I froze. Because in that moment, I understood something I never truly understood in university. I'm 26 years old, a black person walked away from a physics degree in the first year. And before anyone assumes it, I didn't drop out because I failed. I didn't drop out because it was too hard, but because I could feel something dying. And that something was the reason I fell in love with physics in the first place. Curiosity. When I first loved physics, it felt like decoding reality, like discovering that the universe wasn't random. It was structured. There was rhythm, order, elegance. But somewhere between lectures and exams, that elegance faded. Physics became memorization, formulas to store, procedures to repeat, problems to solve under time pressure. And I remember sitting in class thinking, why do I feel further from understanding than ever before? How is it possible to be surrounded by equations and feel disconnected from what they actually mean? That scared me, because if physics became mechanical, I would lose the one thing that made it beautiful. So I left. Quietly. No drama, no speech, just a decision. And here is something nobody tells you about dropping out. When you leave something prestigious, people don't shout at you. They don't scream, they just go quiet. And in that silence you begin questioning yourself. Was I impatient? Was I arrogant? Was I naive? Because when you say I'm leaving to protect my passion, you better not be wrong. Because if you are, you don't just lose school. You lose direction. You lose credibility. You lose identity. For the first week I felt free. No deadlines, no pressure, no grading system. Just me, a chair, blank sheets of paper and classical music playing softly in the background. Not because it made me smarter, but because it made the room feel timeless. But freedom is intoxicating at first. And then it becomes heavy. Because when nobody tells you what to study, you realize something uncomfortable. You are responsible for your own depth. There is no syllabus, no roadmap. It's just you and your honesty. And that's when the obsession began. One question refused to leave me alone. What is instantaneous velocity really? Not the definition, not the derivative of displacement. I wanted to understand what it actually means. How can motion have a velocity at a single instant? How can something be changing at a moment that has no duration? What exactly is happening at the smallest possible scale? I refused to Google this. I could have. It would have taken seconds, but I didn't. Because if I looked it up, I would never know if I could see it for myself. But after a while, I decided to Google it anyway. And I got nothing. Literally nothing. My question remained unanswered. Weeks passed. My papers filled up with attempts, wrong turns, half ideas, moments where I thought I was close, moments where I realized I wasn't. There were nights I sat there thinking, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I romanticized independence. Maybe university wasn't the enemy. Maybe I was. And that thought was heavier than any equation. Because walking away is easy to justify in theory. Living with it daily is different. Every blank page felt like a test. Every silence felt like judgment. And then it happened. Not during deep focus, not during intense study, but in the most ordinary moment possible. I was washing dishes. Water running, plates clinking, nothing dramatic, and thought came back again. Velocity at a single instant. Particle moving in a straight line under the influence of a constant force. A corresponding velocity being imparted to the particle. Simultaneity of cause and effect impossible. V is equals to U plus AT obeyed. But displacement. Displacement. That is unusual. Half AT. How is that even possible? Wait. Was Pythagoras wrong? Particle disappearing from one position and reappearing in the next. In deep space, tracing a linear trajectory. Zeno's paradox. A tortoise. That's why. All matter exhibited a kind of motion previously unknown to the human mind, time flowing discretely. The dimensions of every term of such an equation with respect to each of the three fundamental units must be the same. If not, the equation is absurd and contains some error. Echoed Maxwell's words. The equation was so good that I couldn't help but brush that notion aside. And I stood there, water still running, heart racing, because I wasn't remembering a formula. I was watching it form. And for the first time in my life, though the equation felt familiar, it was something I built. I dried my hands, quickly walked back to my room, sat in that chair, and wrote it down step by step, carefully, logically, slowly, not copying, but deriving. And when I finished, though grateful, I didn't feel brilliant. I felt relief, because something inside of me finally settled. Let me be clear, I didn't invent something completely new. Some physicists might have figured this out centuries ago, but that's not the point. The point is this: there's a difference between memorizing knowledge and reconstructing it. Memorized knowledge feels external. Reconstructed knowledge feels internal. And that kitchen moment changed my identity. I stopped feeling like someone who dropped out and started feeling like someone who understands. And that difference is everything, because understanding feels quieter, but stronger. It doesn't need applause, it doesn't need validation, it just feels true. Physics isn't owned by institutions, it's not owned by degrees or titles. It belongs to anyone stubborn enough to ask why. A few years, one chair, stacks of paper, classical music drifting through a small room, doubt, silence, soap on my hands, and a disappearing particle. That's how I found my way back. Not to university, but to curiosity. And here's what I've realized. This equation was just the beginning. Because once you rebuild one thing from first principles, you start wondering what else lies to be discovered. And hopefully in my next video, I'm going to show you something that took this realization even further. Something that challenged me even more deeply than this equation ever did. Because this story wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.